Hi, I'm Jessica. The family court tried to destroy me for refusing to sign away my children's future, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching my own mother sit silent while they painted me as an unfit parent. My kids were told I was dangerous. My military service was twisted into a liability. They called it protecting the children's best interests. But when my stepfather, Colonel Marcus Reed, walked into that courtroom with a classified folder, everything changed. What was in those files that made the judge's face go white? What had they been hiding about my service record that could flip this entire case upside down? I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The fluorescent lights in Family Court Building 7 hummed with the kind of energy that makes your skin crawl. I'd been in war zones that felt less hostile than this sterile hallway lined with plastic chairs and motivational posters about putting children first. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was here because I'd refused to put anyone before my children, especially not my ex-husband's new wife who wanted to adopt them and erase me from their lives entirely. My heels clicked against the polished linoleum as I approached courtroom 3B. Each step echoed like a countdown. 3 months ago, I'd been Staff Sergeant Jessica Hawthorne, decorated combat engineer with 2 tours under my belt and a spotless record. Today, I was Jessica Morrison, the unstable veteran mom who needed supervised visitation to see her own 8 and 10-year-old daughters. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It started 6 months earlier when I refused to sign the adoption consent forms that Ryan, my ex-husband, had hand-delivered to my apartment with a smile that never reached his eyes. His new wife, Patricia, had been campaigning for this since their wedding. She wanted a clean slate, a perfect family photo without the complication of an ex-wife who'd actually given birth to the children she was trying to claim. "Think about what's best for Emma and Sophie," Ryan had said, standing in my doorway like he owned the place. "Patricia can give them stability. You're always deploying, always gone. They need a real mother." I'd looked at those papers for exactly 3 seconds before tearing them in half. "I am their real mother," I'd said, "and I'm not going anywhere." That was my first mistake. The second was underestimating how far they'd go to make me disappear. The custody battle started quietly, almost reasonably. Ryan filed for modification of our existing arrangement, claiming my military service made me an unreliable parent. His lawyer painted a picture of a woman who chose combat over her children, who suffered from undiagnosed PTSD, who brought the violence of war into a peaceful suburban home. None of it was true, but truth and perception are different animals in family court. My mother, Linda, had married Colonel Marcus Reed when I was 15. He'd been a father figure through my teenage years, walked me down the aisle at my wedding, and been the first person I called when I decided to enlist. When the custody case began, I'd expected his support. Instead, I got silence. "This is between you and Ryan," he'd said when I asked him to testify about my character. "I don't want to get involved in family drama." Family drama. As if my children's future was something petty he could avoid by staying neutral. The courtroom was already packed when I arrived. Ryan sat at the plaintiff's table in his best suit, Patricia beside him in pearls and a navy dress that screamed responsible stepmother. Their lawyer, Margaret Thornton, shuffled through papers with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case like this. She specialized in what she called complex family reconstruction, which was legal speak for helping new wives erase old ones. I took my seat next to my court-appointed attorney, David Kim, a public defender who meant well but was clearly outgunned. The state had assigned him after I'd burned through my savings on the first lawyer, the one who'd dropped me the moment things got complicated. Judge Harold Brennan entered with the kind of authority that made everyone stand without being told. He was known for his traditional family values, which in family court circles meant he favored stable 2-parent homes over anything that looked messy or unconventional. A single mother with a military background was about as unconventional as it got in his courtroom. "We're here today for the Morrison custody modification hearing," Judge Brennan announced, settling into his chair. "The petitioner seeks to modify the current arrangement and requests that Mrs. Patricia Morrison be granted adoption rights for the minor children." The words hit me like shrapnel. They weren't just trying to limit my custody anymore. They wanted Patricia to legally become my daughter's mother while I became a stranger with weekend privileges. Margaret Thornton stood first, her opening statement delivered with surgical precision. She painted a picture of instability, of a mother who'd chosen military service over motherhood, who'd missed birthdays and school plays for deployments, who came home different and distant. She produced school records showing Emma's grades had slipped after my last deployment. She presented testimony from Patricia's friends about how natural she was with the children, how they'd started calling her mom voluntarily. Every word was designed to build a case that I was the problem, that my daughters would be better off without me. Staff Sergeant Hawthorne's service record shows multiple deployments to combat zones, Thornton continued. While we respect her sacrifice, the reality is that military life is incompatible with the stability these children need. The petitioner's new family unit provides consistency, reliability, and most importantly, presence. When David Kim stood for my defense, his voice lacked the same conviction. He talked about my love for my daughters, my sacrifice for the country, and my clean record. But he was fighting with heart against strategy, and in family court, strategy usually wins. That's when the real assault began. Your Honor, Thornton said, standing with a new folder in hand, we'd like to present additional evidence regarding the respondent's fitness as a parent. She pulled out a psychological evaluation I'd never seen before, supposedly conducted by a doctor I'd never met. According to the report, I showed signs of combat-related stress disorders and difficulty maintaining emotional regulation in civilian settings. The evaluation recommended supervised visitation until I could complete comprehensive therapy and anger management courses. I never took this evaluation, I said, loud enough for the gallery to hear. Judge Brennan's gavel came down hard. Mrs. Morrison, you'll have your chance to respond through your counsel. But David Kim looked as shocked as I felt. He scrambled through his notes, clearly unprepared for this ambush. Your Honor, we weren't provided with this evaluation during discovery. We need time to review. The court received this evaluation yesterday through proper channels, Thornton interrupted smoothly. Dr. Patricia Weiss conducted the assessment based on interviews with the children's father and stepmother, as well as school officials and neighbors. The respondent's refusal to participate voluntarily speaks to her unwillingness to address these issues. Refusal to participate. I'd never been asked to participate. The next hour was a masterclass in character assassination. They presented testimony from Emma's teacher about how she'd become withdrawn after talking to me on the phone. They brought in our former neighbor who claimed I'd seemed agitated when I returned from deployment. They produced medical records from the VA that they claimed showed I was receiving treatment for PTSD, though the actual records were sealed and couldn't be examined. Every piece of evidence was circumstantial, but together they built a narrative that was devastating in its simplicity. I was a damaged veteran who couldn't provide the stability my children needed. Through it all, my daughters sat in the gallery with a court advocate, forbidden from speaking to me. Emma, my 10-year-old, kept looking back at me with confusion in her eyes. Sophie, only 8, played with a small toy in her lap, too young to understand why Mommy was sitting so far away. When court recessed for lunch, I sat alone in the hallway while Ryan's family gathered around him like he was the victim in all this. Patricia knelt down to talk to my daughters, brushing Emma's hair back with the kind of maternal gesture that would play perfectly for any observers. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I thought might still believe in me. Marcus, I said when my stepfather answered. I need you to testify. They're destroying me there. There was a long pause. Jessica, I told you I can't get involved in this. They're lying about my service record. They're saying I have PTSD, that I'm unstable. You know that's not true. Family court is complicated, he said carefully. Maybe it would be better if you just... I hung up before he could finish. Maybe it would be better if I just... What? Disappeared? Let Patricia have my children? Pretend the last 10 years of motherhood never happened? When court resumed, Judge Brennan looked at me with something that might have been pity but felt more like dismissal. Mrs. Morrison, he said, given the evidence presented today, I'm inclined to grant the petitioner's request for modified custody and adoption proceedings. However, I'll give you one final opportunity to present any evidence in your defense. David Kim stood slowly, his hands empty. Your Honor, we request a continuance to properly review the psychological evaluation and request denied, Judge Brennan said. This case has already been continued twice. These children need stability, not prolonged legal battles. That's when the courtroom doors opened with a sound like thunder. Colonel Marcus Reed walked in wearing his dress uniform, ribbons and medals catching the fluorescent light. But it wasn't his appearance that made the room go silent. It was the classified folder in his hand, and the look on his face that said he was done staying neutral. Every head turned. Ryan's confident expression flickered. Margaret Thornton actually stepped back from her table. Even Judge Brennan straightened in his chair, because everyone in that room recognized what a full colonel in dress blues carrying classified documents meant. Marcus walked straight to the witness stand without being called, his eyes fixed on mine for the first time in months. And in that look, I saw something I'd almost forgotten existed. Someone who knew the truth about who I really was. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. 3 years earlier, I had been living what most people would call the American dream. Staff Sergeant Jessica Hawthorne, stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, with a spotless service record and a family that actually functioned. Ryan was still Ryan then, but he was my Ryan, the man who'd married me in my dress blues and promised he understood what military life meant. Emma and Sophie were 5 and 7, still young enough to think mommy in uniform was the coolest thing in the world. The first crack appeared during a family barbecue at Marcus and Mom's house in Colorado Springs. Ryan had been drinking, not enough to be obvious, but enough to loosen the filter he usually kept on his resentments. Patricia was there as Mom's friend from her book club, recently divorced, and looking for a fresh start. She worked in real estate, specialized in family-friendly communities, and had opinions about everything from school districts to child psychology. "It must be so hard," Patricia had said to Ryan while I was inside getting more ice. I caught the conversation through the kitchen window. "Raising children when their mother is always gone. You're really more like a single father, aren't you?" Ryan's laugh had an edge to it. "Some days it feels that way. Jess thinks the army comes first, family comes second. That's not sustainable," Patricia said, her voice full of the kind of concern that sounds helpful but cuts deep. "Children need consistency. They need a mother who's actually present." I stood there holding a bag of ice, listening to my husband agree with a stranger about how I was failing our children. That was the moment I should have seen what was coming. Instead, I walked back outside, forced a smile, and pretended I hadn't heard anything. The deployment orders came 2 months later. 12 months in Afghanistan, working with combat engineers to clear IEDs and rebuild infrastructure. It was dangerous work, but it was what I'd trained for. Ryan had known this was possible when he married me. He'd signed up for it just like I had. Except somewhere along the way, he'd changed his mind. "You don't have to go," he said the night I told him about the orders. We were in our bedroom, Emma and Sophie asleep down the hall. "You could request a transfer, take a desk job. Other military wives do it." "Other military wives aren't combat engineers," I said. "This is my job, Ryan. It's what I do." "What about what I do?" His voice was quiet, but there was something new in it, something that sounded like an accusation. "What about me holding down the fort while you go play soldier halfway around the world?" Play soldier. As if my military service was a hobby I could pick up and put down when it was convenient. "This isn't negotiable," I said. I took an oath. "What about the oath you took to me? To our family?" That fight lasted 3 hours and ended with Ryan sleeping in the guest room, but by morning, he was apologetic, supportive, back to being the man I'd married. He helped me prepare for deployment, promised to send pictures and videos every day, and swore he'd hold everything together until I got home. He kept those promises for about 3 months. The changes started subtly. Fewer phone calls, shorter video chats with the girls. When I asked about it, Ryan always had reasonable explanation. Emma had soccer practice. Sophie was at a sleepover. The time difference was hard to manage. Patricia started appearing in the background of family photos he'd text me. "Just a friend helping out," he said. Someone to drive the girls to activities when his work schedule got crazy. By month 6, Patricia wasn't in the background anymore. She was front and center, braiding Sophie's hair for school pictures, helping Emma with a science project, attending parent-teacher conferences, because Ryan couldn't get off work. The girls started mentioning her in our video calls. Patricia showed me how to French braid. Patricia made us pancakes that look like Mickey Mouse. Patricia says I'm really good at soccer. I was 7,000 miles away, sleeping in a tent, clearing roadside bombs, and my daughters were bonding with another woman who was slowly taking my place. She's just helping, Ryan insisted when I brought it up. The girls like her, isn't that what matters? What mattered was that my children were forgetting I existed while I was overseas serving my country. But every time I tried to express that, Ryan made me sound jealous and selfish. He was good at that, making my legitimate concerns sound like character flaws. The final month of deployment was when everything fell apart. The girls' calls became stilted, formal, like they were talking to a distant relative instead of their mother. Emma started calling Patricia, Patricia, and then just Mom, when she thought I wasn't listening carefully. Sophie, always my little shadow, seemed confused about why I wasn't home yet, when Mom was right there. When I video called on Sophie's 8th birthday, she was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. The party was in full swing in my own backyard, with Patricia acting as hostess. My daughter blew out candles on a cake another woman had made, surrounded by friends whose parents I didn't recognize anymore. "Did you have a good birthday, baby?" I asked Sophie when she finally came to the laptop. "Uh-huh," she said, distracted by something happening off camera. "Mom made the best cake ever. She put real flowers on it." "I'm your mom, Sophie," I said gently. She looked confused for a second, then glanced toward Patricia, who was standing just out of camera range. "I know," Sophie said finally, "but Mom Patricia is here." That night, I cried for the first time since deployment started. Not because of anything that had happened in Afghanistan, but because I was losing my children to a woman who was supposed to be helping temporarily. I called Marcus, needing someone who understood both military service and family responsibility. He'd done multiple deployments during his career, had raised me through my teenage years while managing his own demanding schedule. "They're just adjusting," he said, when I explained what was happening. "Kids adapt. When you get home, things will go back to normal, will they?" I asked. "Because it feels like Ryan and Patricia are building a life that doesn't include me." There was a long pause. "Jessica, you chose this career. You knew the sacrifices it would require. I chose to serve my country. I didn't choose to lose my family. Maybe it's time to think about what's more important," he said. "Your career or your children?" The fact that he saw it as an either-or choice told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties lay. Military families made sacrifices, but they were supposed to make them together. Instead, mine was reorganizing itself around my absence. When I finally came home, I barely recognized my own life. Patricia had redecorated the girls' rooms, organized their closets, established new routines and rules. She knew their teachers, their friends' parents, their favorite foods. She knew things about my daughter's daily lives that I didn't know anymore. Emma hugged me when I walked through the door, but it was the polite hug you give a visiting relative, not the desperate embrace I'd been dreaming about for 12 months. Sophie was shy, hiding behind Patricia's legs like I was a stranger. "They need time to readjust," Patricia explained, with the kind of understanding smile that made my skin crawl. "It's been a big change for them, having gone so long." Ryan was different too, distant, going through the motions of being glad I was home, but treating me like a guest in my own house. He deferred to Patricia about the girls' schedules, their preferences, and their needs. Somewhere during my deployment, she'd become the primary parent and I'd become the visitor. The first real fight happened 2 weeks after I got back. Emma had a soccer game, and I wanted to take her shopping for new cleats afterward, just the two of us. Some mother-daughter time to reconnect. "She already has cleats," Patricia said. "I bought them last month, the ones she picked out." "I want to buy them for her," I said. "I'm her mother." Patricia exchanged a look with Ryan, one of those silent communications that couples develop. "Of course," she said carefully. "I just thought you'd want to save money since you'll probably be deploying again soon." The assumption was like a slap, that I'd be leaving again, that this homecoming was temporary, that Patricia's role as substitute mother was permanent. "I'm not deploying again," I said. "I'm getting out." Ryan's head snapped up. "What?" "I'm finishing my current contract and transitioning to civilian life. I want to be here for the girls." The silence that followed was deafening. I'd expected relief, gratitude, excitement about our family being whole again. Instead, Ryan looked panicked, and Patricia looked calculating. That's a big decision, Ryan said finally. Maybe we should talk about this privately. But there was nothing private about it anymore. Patricia was part of every decision, every conversation, every aspect of our family life. She'd inserted herself so completely that removing her would require surgery. That night, after the girls were in bed, Ryan sat me down at our kitchen table, with the careful expression of someone about to deliver bad news. I think we need some space, he said. Space from what? From each other. From this situation. The girls are confused, having both you and Patricia here. It's not fair to them. Patricia doesn't have to be here, I said. She was a temporary help. I'm home now. It's not that simple anymore, Ryan said. The girls are attached to her. They've been through enough upheaval. Maybe it would be better if you found your own place for a while. Let everyone adjust gradually. I stared at him, this man I'd been married to for 8 years, who was asking me to move out of my own home so his girlfriend could continue playing house with my children. You want me to leave? I asked. I want what's best for Emma and Sophie, he said. And right now, that's stability. That's when I understood. The deployment hadn't just changed my relationship with my daughters. It had given Ryan and Patricia time to build a new family structure, one where I was the disruption, not the foundation. They'd spent 12 months convincing my children that this was normal, that this was better, that this was home. I moved out the next week, into a small apartment across town. The girls visited on weekends, but those visits felt forced, artificial. They were polite but distant, like they were humoring me. Patricia had become their daily reality, and I was becoming their obligation. 6 months later, Ryan filed for divorce. 3 months after that, he filed for full custody, claiming my military service made me an unfit parent, and Patricia, the woman who'd started as temporary help, filed for step-parent adoption rights. They'd played a long game, and I'd been too naive to see it until it was too late. By the time I realized what was happening, they'd already won my children's hearts. The legal battle was just making it official. The character assassination began with my own children. 3 weeks after Ryan filed for full custody, Emma came to my apartment for our scheduled weekend visit, carrying a small notebook. She was 9 then, still young enough to be honest about things that confused her. Dad gave me this, she said, showing me a purple journal with a unicorn on the cover. He said I should write down how I feel when I'm here. I flipped through the pages. Each one had prompts printed at the top. How did Mommy make you feel today? Did Mommy seem angry or upset? Would you rather be at home with Dad and Mom Patricia? The questions were designed to extract negative responses, to build a paper trail of my supposed failures as a parent. What did Dad tell you about this notebook? I asked carefully. He said it would help the judge understand what's best for me and Sophie, Emma said. He said, grown-ups sometimes need help making good decisions. I wanted to throw that manipulative journal across the room. Instead, I sat down next to my daughter and helped her write her first entry. Mom made pancakes with chocolate chips. We played board games. I felt happy, simple truth, unmanipulated. But the notebook was just the beginning. Over the next month, the systematic destruction of my reputation accelerated. Ryan's lawyer, Margaret Thornton, was building a case not just against my fitness as a parent, but against my very identity as a human being. The first attack came through my former workplace. Thornton had somehow obtained my military personnel file, not the classified portions, but enough to paint a picture of a woman who chose violence over family. She highlighted every training exercise, every weapons qualification, every deployment to a combat zone. In family court, my service record became evidence of instability rather than dedication. Mrs. Morrison has been trained to kill, Thornton argued in preliminary hearings I wasn't even allowed to attend. She's been conditioned for violence, exposed to trauma, and taught to prioritize mission over personal relationships. These are not qualities we want in a primary caregiver. My own accomplishments were twisted into character flaws. The Bronze Star I'd earned for saving 3 soldiers' lives during an IED attack became proof that I sought out dangerous situations. My promotion to staff sergeant at a young age became evidence that I valued career over motherhood. Every medal, every commendation, every mark of distinction was reframed as a red flag. The psychological warfare extended to my civilian life. Suddenly, everywhere I went in our small Colorado town, people treated me differently. The grocery store clerk who used to ask about the girls now avoided eye contact. The barista at the coffee shop where I'd brought Emma and Sophie for hot chocolate stopped making conversation. My neighbors, people I'd known for years, crossed the street rather than wave hello. Ryan and Patricia had been busy during those preliminary hearings, spreading their version of events through every social circle we'd shared. At Emma's school, Patricia was now listed as the primary emergency contact. At Sophie's dance class, Patricia was the one who signed permission slips and attended recitals. I'd become a footnote in my own children's lives, the birth mother who visited on court-approved weekends. The most devastating blow came through my daughter's therapy sessions. Ryan had enrolled them in counseling, ostensibly to help them cope with the divorce. But the therapist, Dr. Sharon Kellerman, had been handpicked by Thornton. She specialized in high-conflict custody situations and had a reputation for supporting whichever parent seemed most stable and financially secure. Kellerman's reports painted my children as victims of my erratic behavior and inappropriate military mindset. According to her notes, Emma had expressed fear that I might hurt someone because of my combat training. Sophie had allegedly said she felt safer with Patricia because Mom Patricia doesn't yell like Mommy. None of it was true. I'd never yelled at my children, never displayed anything resembling erratic behavior, never done anything to make them feel unsafe. Kellerman's professional opinion carried weight in family court, and her reports became cornerstone evidence in Ryan's custody case. When I requested to speak with the therapist directly, I was told that would be inappropriate and could interfere with the therapeutic process. When I asked to see the session notes, I was informed they were confidential. The children I'd given birth to, raised from infancy, and loved unconditionally, were being turned against me by a stranger with a degree and an agenda. The financial destruction was equally methodical. Ryan had emptied our joint savings account the day after he filed for divorce, claiming he needed the money for temporary child support and legal fees. My access to our joint credit cards was revoked. The house, which had been in both our names, was suddenly encumbered by a second mortgage I'd never signed. When I contacted the bank, they showed me documents with my forged signature, authorizing Ryan to handle all financial matters during my deployment. The signature looked close enough to mine that proving forgery would require expensive handwriting analysis, money I no longer had access to. My own lawyer, the first one I'd hired with my deployment savings, was clearly outmatched. James Crawford was a decent man who handled simple divorces and property disputes, but he was up against Margaret Thornton, who specialized in high-stakes custody battles and had unlimited resources to draw from. Crawford filed the standard motions, requested the usual documentation, and prepared for a straightforward legal proceeding. He had no idea he was walking into a war. Thornton's team worked around the clock to build their case. They interviewed everyone who'd ever had contact with my family, looking for anything that could be twisted into evidence of my unfitness. They spoke to my former neighbors, my children's teachers, my ex-colleagues, anyone who might have witnessed a moment of frustration or stress that could be reframed as instability. The most insidious part was how reasonable it all sounded when presented by professionals in expensive suits. Of course, a combat veteran might struggle with civilian life. Of course, children would benefit from a stable, two-parent home over a single mother's apartment. Of course, a stepmother who'd been present and involved for over a year would be preferable to a mother who'd been absent for 12 months. They built their narrative carefully, using just enough truth to make the lies believable. Yes, I had been deployed. Yes, I had lived in my children's lives for a year. Yes, I was now a single mother with limited financial resources. They took those facts and wrapped them in speculation, professional opinion, and carefully guided testimony to create a portrait of a woman who was dangerous to the very children she died to protect. The turning point came when they somehow gained access to my VA medical records. I'd sought counseling after my deployment, not because I was suffering from PTSD, but because the transition back to civilian life had been harder than expected. The counselor had noted that I was processing grief related to missed milestones with children and adjusting to changes in family dynamics. Normal, healthy responses to a difficult situation. But in Thornton's hands, those counseling sessions became evidence of mental health issues. The grief I felt about missing my daughter's growth became difficulty bonding with children. My adjustment challenges became inability to reintegrate into family life. My responsible decision to seek help became proof that I needed help. When I confronted Crawford about how they'd obtained sealed medical records, he looked genuinely confused. "They shouldn't have access to that," he said. "Those files are protected by federal privacy laws." But they had them, and they were using them, and Crawford had no idea how to fight back against that level of systemic manipulation. I was learning that family court operated by different rules than military justice. In the Army, evidence had to be obtained legally, witnesses had to tell the truth, and due process meant something. In family court, the only thing that mattered was what the judge believed, and judges believed what sounded most reasonable. The systematic destruction wasn't just professional, it was personal. My relationship with my own mother began to deteriorate as she struggled to navigate between her loyalty to me and her marriage to Marcus. Marcus had made it clear that he considered my custody battle a family drama that threatened his reputation and career. Mom started making excuses not to see me, canceling dinners, avoiding phone calls. "I don't want to take sides," she said, when I confronted her. "This is between you and Ryan." But there were no neutral parties in this war. By refusing to support me, she was supporting them. By staying silent, she was amplifying their narrative. By prioritizing her husband's comfort over her daughter's crisis, she was choosing sides whether she admitted it or not. The isolation was complete. My children were being programmed to fear me. My community had turned against me. My family had abandoned me. My financial resources were gone. My medical privacy had been violated. My service record was being used as a weapon against me. And through it all, Patricia moved through the world with the confidence of someone who'd won before the battle was even officially fought. She attended school events as mom, signed up for parent-teacher conferences, enrolled in mom groups at the community center. She was building a public identity as my children's mother while I was being systematically erased from their lives. The most chilling moment came when I picked up Emma and Sophie for what would be my last unsupervised weekend visit. As I walked them to my car, Patricia called out from the front door. "Girls, remember what we talked about," she said with a sweet smile. "If you feel uncomfortable or scared, just call me and I'll come get you right away." Emma and Sophie nodded seriously, as if they were walking into danger instead of spending time with their own mother. They'd been trained to see me as a threat, to view my love as something to be endured rather than embraced. That weekend, they were polite but distant, careful not to say or do anything that might upset me. They treated me like a fragile stranger, tiptoeing around my feelings while clearly counting the hours until they could return to their real home. I realized then that I'd already lost them. The legal battle was just making it official. The break in my case came from an unexpected source: a parking ticket. I was sitting in my apartment, drowning in legal documents and mounting bills, when I noticed something odd in the discovery materials Crawford had finally managed to obtain. Among the hundreds of pages of financial records, school reports, and medical files was a simple parking citation dated 3 months before my return from deployment. The ticket was issued to Patricia's car, parked outside Dr. Kellerman's office at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. But according to the therapy session notes, Emma's appointment that day was at 3 p.m., and the session summary indicated Emma had arrived accompanied by father. Ryan's work schedule, which I'd memorized during our marriage, showed he was in court that afternoon representing a client in Denver, 2 hours away. Someone was lying. Either the parking ticket was wrong, or Patricia had been at that therapy session when she legally had no right to be there, influencing what my daughter said to a therapist who was supposed to be neutral. I started digging deeper, armed with the investigative skills the Army had taught me and the desperate focus of a mother fighting for her children. I requested Patricia's credit card statements through my lawyer, claiming they were relevant to determine household expenses. Hidden in those routine transactions was a pattern that made my blood run cold. Regular payments to Dr. Kellerman, starting a full month before Emma and Sophie's first session. Payments labeled as consultation fees that happen weeks before my children ever set foot in that office. Patricia hadn't just chosen the therapist, she'd been paying her to prepare a specific narrative before my daughters ever spoke a word. But that was just the beginning. I found payments to a private investigator named Derek Lansing, amounts that totaled more than I'd made in 6 months. I found consulting fees paid to Margaret Thornton months before Ryan filed for divorce, proving this wasn't a reactive custody case but a premeditated campaign. Most damning of all, I found a payment to a document specialist in Denver, a company that advertised signature matching and replication services. My forged signature on the mortgage documents wasn't an accident or a mistake, it was a purchase service. I presented my findings to Crawford, but he was clearly overwhelmed. His voice was weak, but his words were clear as he detailed how Blackstone had paid him to violate medical privacy laws and create false psychological profiles. They didn't want an honest assessment of Staff Sergeant Morrison's mental health, Martinez testified. They wanted specific language that would support their predetermined conclusion that she was unfit. When I refused to fabricate more serious allegations, they threatened to expose my gambling debts and destroy my career. Martinez's testimony revealed the scope of the conspiracy beyond what even we had discovered. Blackstone hadn't just targeted me, they'd systematically compromised medical professionals, school officials, and social workers across multiple states to create a network of people willing to provide false testimony against military parents. How many other families were affected? Chen asked. Based on the files I saw, at least 50 active cases, with plans to expand to over 200 military families nationwide, Martinez said. They were building an industry around destroying military parents' rights. When Chen called Emma and Sophie to testify, Judge Brennan initially resisted, saying the children had been through enough trauma. But Chen argued that they had the right to speak about their own lives, without the filter of court-appointed advocates who'd been compromised by the conspiracy. My daughters entered the courtroom holding hands, Emma protecting Sophie the way she always had. They looked so much older than when this ordeal began, forced to mature by circumstances that should never have touched their lives. Emma spoke first, her voice strong despite her obvious nervousness. Patricia told us we had to be afraid of Mom because soldiers hurt people, she said. But Mom never hurt us. She taught us how to be brave. Did your mother ever make you feel unsafe? Chen asked gently. No, Emma said firmly. We felt unsafe when Patricia said we couldn't talk to Mom anymore. We felt unsafe when they made us lie about Mom in therapy. Sophie's testimony was simpler but equally powerful. When Chen asked her who she wanted to live with, Sophie looked directly at me and said, I want to go home with my real mom. The children's testimony shattered whatever remained of Thornton's case, but she tried one last desperate gambit. She called Patricia to the stand, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage of their conspiracy. Patricia's testimony was a masterclass in manipulation, even under oath. She painted herself as a victim who'd been trying to protect the children from what she believed was a dangerous situation. She claimed she'd acted in good faith, based on information provided by professionals she trusted. I loved Emma and Sophie like my own children, Patricia said, tears flowing on cue. Everything I did was because I genuinely believed they were in danger. But Chen's cross-examination exposed the calculated nature of Patricia's actions. Using financial records and communication logs, Chen showed how Patricia had been planning to replace me from the moment she met Ryan, how she'd systematically worked to erase me from my children's lives, while I was overseas serving my country. Mrs. Morrison, Chen said, holding up a printout of Patricia's browsing history, why were you researching how to adopt stepchildren against biological parent wishes 3 weeks before Staff Sergeant Morrison returned from deployment? Patricia's composure cracked. I wanted to understand the legal process. And why did you create a Pinterest board titled Emma and Sophie's New Lives that included bedroom decorations with no mention of their biological mother? Dated 6 months before you filed for adoption. Each question revealed more premeditation, more evidence that Patricia had never intended to be temporary help, but had always planned to permanently replace me. The Pinterest board was particularly damaging because it showed her envisioning a future where I simply didn't exist in my children's lives. When Chen presented the fabricated psychological evaluation, the courtroom went silent. She'd brought in a handwriting expert who testified that the document had been created using a computer program designed to mimic professional psychological assessments, and that the supposed author, Dr. Patricia Weiss, had never existed. This entire document, Chen said, holding up the evaluation that had been used to justify supervised visitation, was created by Blackstone consultants using stolen templates from legitimate psychological practices. There is no Dr. Patricia Weiss, there was no evaluation. This is complete fiction. Judge Brennan's face darkened as he reviewed the evidence. Mrs. Thornton, he said, are you telling me that your office presented fabricated evidence to this court? Thornton stammered, claiming she'd received the evaluation through proper channels and had no knowledge of its fraudulent nature. But the damage was done. The cornerstone of their case against me was proven to be completely manufactured. The final blow came when Chen presented recordings from Blackstone's offices, obtained through the FBI investigation. The jury heard consultants discussing my case like a business opportunity, talking about maximizing billable hours and testing new narrative strategies on my family. The target is emotionally vulnerable due to deployment separation, one Blackstone consultant said in a recorded phone call. We can exploit the guilt she feels about missing her children's milestones, frame her military service as choosing career over family. Another recording captured Patricia discussing payment structures with Blackstone representatives. I don't care how much it costs, Patricia's voice said clearly. I want those children to forget she ever existed. When the recordings ended, the courtroom was completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, staring at her machine in shock at what she'd just transcribed. Judge Brennan called for a recess, but when he returned 30 minutes later, his demeanor had completely changed. The man who'd been ready to award custody to Ryan and Patricia now looked at them with undisguised disgust. In 35 years on the bench, Judge Brennan said, I have never seen such a systematic effort to pervert the justice system and destroy a family. This court has been used as a weapon against an innocent woman and her children, and I will not be party to this fraud any longer. He turned to me, his voice softer but still official. Staff Sergeant Morrison, I want to personally apologize for the injustices you've suffered in this courtroom. You have been the victim of an elaborate criminal conspiracy, and this court failed to protect you and your children. Then he turned to Ryan and Patricia, and his voice became ice cold. Mr. Morrison, Mrs. Morrison, you will have no further contact with Emma and Sophie Morrison, except under circumstances ordered by this court. All custody and visitation rights are hereby terminated. Furthermore, I am referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution for fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. The gavel came down with the sound of justice finally being served. Patricia began crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of fury at being caught. Ryan sat motionless, staring at the table as his elaborate plan crumbled around him. But the most important moment came when Judge Brennan looked at Emma and Sophie, who'd been sitting with a court advocate throughout the proceedings. Girls, he said gently, you're going home with your mother, where you belong. Emma and Sophie ran to me, and for the first time in over a year, I held my daughters without a court officer timing our interaction. They were home. 6 months after the court victory, I stood in the lobby of the newly opened Morrison Military Family Defense Center, watching Emma and Sophie help other children whose parents were fighting similar battles. The building had been purchased with the settlement money from our lawsuit against Blackstone Consulting, which had folded completely after facing federal charges and dozens of civil suits from families across the country. The center wasn't just a law office, it was a fortress for military families under attack. We had Sarah Chen leading our legal team, Marcus Weber heading our investigation unit, and a network of pro bono attorneys who understood that family court could be weaponized against service members. But most importantly, we had something Blackstone never counted on: veterans who refused to let other veterans fight alone. Emma, now 11, had become our unofficial ambassador to children caught in custody battles. She'd created a support group for kids whose families were being torn apart by legal warfare, teaching them the same resilience that had carried her through our ordeal. Sophie, 9 now, worked with our child advocates, helping scared children understand that loving their deployed parent wasn't something they needed to hide. The transformation in my daughters has been remarkable. The fear and confusion that Patricia and Ryan had instilled in them had been replaced by confidence and purpose. They understood now that they hadn't been protected from me, they'd been protected from the truth, and that truth had set all of us free. "Mom," Emma said, approaching my desk with a folder in her hand, "Mrs. Chen wants you to see this new case. It's a Navy SEAL whose ex-wife is using his PTSD diagnosis against him." I took the file, scanning the familiar pattern of character assassination and manufactured evidence. The template was almost identical to what had been used against me. A decorated service member portrayed as unstable, a new spouse eager to adopt children, and a family court system that favored the appearance of stability over the reality of love. "What do you think?" Emma asked, reading my expression. "I think we're going to help him," I said, "just like people helped us." The Morrison Center had handled 43 cases in its first 6 months, with a success rate that had caught national attention. We'd exposed 2 more consulting firms similar to Blackstone, uncovered a network of corrupt therapists who specialized in custody cases, and helped draft federal legislation to protect military families from systematic targeting. But our most important victory wasn't in court. It was in the culture shift we'd helped create. Military families were no longer fighting these battles alone and unprepared. They had resources, support networks, and most importantly, knowledge about the tactics being used against them. Dr. Martinez had become one of our most valuable allies after his recovery. His testimony had led to the exposure of 12 other medical professionals who'd been compromising patient confidentiality for money. He now worked with our center full-time, providing legitimate psychological evaluations, and helping to heal the damage done by his former colleagues' betrayals. "Jessica," he said, entering my office with the day's case files, "we just received a call from Fort Hood. A female Apache pilot is facing custody challenges after her ex-husband remarried. The new wife is claiming the pilot's combat experience makes her dangerous to their toddler." The pattern was always the same: weaponize military service, exploit deployment absences, and use the family court's bias toward traditional family structures to destroy the bond between service members and their children. But now we knew how to fight back. Marcus had also undergone a transformation that went beyond simple redemption. He'd become a fierce advocate for military family rights, using his rank and connections to educate other senior officers about the threats their subordinates faced. He'd testified before Congress about the Blackstone conspiracy, helping to pass legislation that required family courts to receive training about military family dynamics. "I spent my career protecting our country," Marcus told the Senate Subcommittee on Military Families. "I failed to protect the families who were protecting our country."
That ends now.
The relationship between Marcus and me had healed, but it was different now. Built on mutual respect rather than paternal authority, strengthened by shared purpose rather than blood ties. He'd earned back my trust by working every day to ensure no other military parent would face what I had faced alone. Mom had struggled more with the aftermath, carrying guilt about her silence during my darkest period. But she'd found her own way to contribute, organizing support groups for military spouses and parents who'd been manipulated by custody conspiracies. Her groups provided something unique: understanding from someone who'd been on the other side of the divide. "I know what it's like to believe the lies," she told new group members. "I know how convincing they can make their evidence sound, but I also know what it's like to discover you've been protecting the wrong people from the wrong things." The criminal trials had been swift and decisive. Patricia received 4 years in federal prison for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. Ryan got 2 years for his role in the financial crimes, though his sentence was reduced in exchange for testifying against other Blackstone clients. Margaret Thornton lost her law license and faced ethics charges that would prevent her from ever practicing family law again. But the most satisfying outcome was Blackstone's complete destruction. The company's assets were liquidated to pay damages to the families they'd targeted, and several executives received significant prison sentences. The FBI's investigation had revealed that their military family restructuring program was just one of many unethical services they offered to wealthy clients seeking to manipulate the legal system. Sarah Chen had been offered a federal judgeship based on her work exposing the conspiracy, but she'd turned it down to stay with our center. "There are too many families still fighting," she explained. "I can do more good here than on any bench." The personal growth that came from surviving systematic destruction had been unexpected. I'd discovered reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed, learned to trust my instincts even when everyone else said I was wrong, and developed an unshakable faith in the power of truth to eventually surface, no matter how deeply it's buried. Emma and Sophie had learned lessons that would serve them for life, that love doesn't disappear just because someone tries to erase it, that truth is worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible, and that families aren't defined by legal documents but by the bonds that survive every attempt to break them. On the one-year anniversary of our court victory, we held the first annual Military Family Strength Conference at the Morrison Center. Over 300 military families attended, along with legal professionals, family court judges, and federal legislators. The keynote speaker was an Army Special Forces medic whose twins had been returned to him after we'd exposed another custody conspiracy. They tried to make our service a weakness, he told the audience, but Jessica Morrison and her team showed us how to make it our strength. During the conference, I received a letter that had been forwarded through military channels. It was from a young Afghan woman named Amara, one of the children I'd helped evacuate during the incident that had nearly destroyed my reputation. I am now studying engineering at university, she wrote in careful English. I want to help rebuild my country like you helped rebuild my life. I heard about your fight for your children, and I wanted you to know that the children you saved in Afghanistan are fighting for our futures too. You taught us that some people risk everything to protect others. We will not forget. Emma read the letter over my shoulder, then looked up at me with pride in her eyes. Mom, you saved kids on 2 different continents. That evening, after the conference ended and the building had emptied, I sat in my office reviewing the day's new case files. Each folder represented a family under attack, children being used as weapons, service members being punished for their sacrifice. But each folder also represented hope, because now these families wouldn't fight alone. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie, who was at a sleepover but still checked in every few hours. Love you, Mom. Can't wait to help more families tomorrow. I smiled, remembering how these same children had once been taught to fear me, to see my love as something dangerous rather than something precious. The transformation wasn't just in our circumstances, it was in our understanding of what family really means and what it's worth fighting for. A soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. Marcus stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who had something important to say. I wanted to thank you, he said, handing me a cup and settling into the chair across from my desk. For what? For showing me what real strength looks like, he said. I spent my career thinking strength was about following orders and protecting the mission. You taught me that sometimes strength means standing alone against everyone and everything when you know you're right. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 veterans who'd fought different battles but had found common ground in protecting the people who mattered most. What's next? Marcus asked, nodding toward the stack of case files. I looked at the files, then at the photos on my desk of Emma and Sophie laughing with other children at the center, then at the letter from Amara that I'd pinned to my bulletin board. Next, we make sure no military family ever fights this battle alone again, I said. Next, we turn their weapon against them by showing the world what military families are really made of. And if they try to stop us, I smiled, thinking of everything we'd already survived and overcome. Let them try. We know how to fight. We know how to win. And most importantly, we know what we're fighting for. The Morrison Military Family Defense Center was more than a law firm or advocacy organization. It was a promise to every service member that their sacrifice would be honored, their families would be protected, and their children would know the truth about who their parents really are. Some battles end with surrender, others end with victory, but the best battles end with transformation, with the creation of something stronger and better than what existed before. That's what we built from the ashes of our destruction, not just justice for ourselves, but hope for everyone who would face similar battles in the future. And we were just getting started. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.